Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Nerdstalgic with me, your host, Luke the Ginger Bookworm. And on today's side quest is going to be a short one. It's going to be a off-the-cuff review for Turning Red, the new Pixar movie. One thing I want to say before I jump in, um, I'll be honest with you, folks, I wasn't planning on doing this review um, as of last night. The reason being is that when Turning Red come out and saw the advertisements for it, I was really excited just to sort of see the movie because I love Pixar. Pixar is one of my favorite animated studios, and no matter what it is, if it's a full-length movie or if it's a short film, I'm there for it. I'll watch it and enjoy it. And seeing the trailers for Turning Red, I was really excited getting into it. It's finally come out on Disney Plus, and I figured when it comes out, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch it. So I did. I sat down and I watched it, and I liked it. I thought it was good. And then I watched it a second time a day or two later to get ready for this review. One of the things that I found is that there's not really much I can say about it, and that was why I was umming and ahhing about doing a short review, doing a short discussion about it. I've seen a few other podcasts of people that I follow that have done like short 4 to 5 minute sort of reviews, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do it a minimum of at least 8 to 10 minutes, but I figured that I don't have a lot to say about it, that I just didn't really want to waste anybody's time, and I figured that it would be too short and nobody would really enjoy it. That was until this morning, well, actually, kind of late last night in the shower and early this morning, I was thinking about this one sort of theory and concept I have in my mind, and one that I've heard a few other movie buffs and movie sort of channels talk about, and I wanted to do my own spin on it and I wanted my own sort of thing on it. So the way this side quest is going to go, I'm going to do my sort of small, brief sort of impressions of Turning Red, and then after that, I was going to give you my theory as to what I think. So I'm not going to give any hints to it because I think it's an interesting topic. From looking at the title of this podcast, you might probably you might be able to figure it out. But for those of you that went in blind, thank you. Thank you for flying my airline. If you at your own risk coming in blind, but either way, I think this will be a quite interesting one. So yeah, let's get on to the sort of quick review, shall we? So, as I mentioned, I've seen Turning Red now 3 times. First time with family, second time on my own, third time with my brother. This is the third movie that has been released by Pixar during the pandemic era. You had Soul, Luca, and now this. That bit of information I need you to hold in your brain for me, because it will become clear later on. Don't worry if you forget, I will remind you because it is quite important to my angle later on. But my overall consensus, my overall sort of views of Turning Red, it's a good film. It's a good coming of age movie. It reminds me a bit of John Hughes, a John Hughes movie, kind of like The Breakfast Club, that sort of idea. Whereas you've got the story follows Mei Mei as she tries to please her family. She tries to make sure that she's does everything her family wants to do. You know, in her mind, she's her own girl. She's her own person. But as the story sort of evolves and changes, you realise that that false preset in her head is wrong. That she not been brainwashed, but it's come as because she does what her parents wants her to do. That's all she's ever done. That's all she knows. So in her mind, what she's doing is what she wants to do. But it's not until later on that she realizes that actually what she's doing is what her mother wants her to do. Is what her mother has kind of persuaded her into thinking that she wants to do, but really doesn't. And it's also this idea of wanting to please your parents and wanting to do make them proud, make them happy, but at the same stage of being yourself, as well as the idea of going through puberty, going through changes. Obviously, I'm a male, so I don't know the struggles that women go through, but I can imagine going through, going with your period for the first time and stuff like that. It's got to be incredibly stressful. And I'll be honest, that's one thing that I wanted to mention in this little review is that one of the things that this movie does, and I've never seen it done anywhere, and generally it made me stop and think. Um, in this story, they do mention the whole idea of periods and the idea of having to have a sanitary towel and stuff like that. I know some people might find it a bit icky, but come on, it's just a way of life. Get over it. It happens. Um, but it made me think of like of any other animated movie I've ever watched that's not adult, that's like purely for kids. Nothing like Rick and Morty or anything like that. It's purely like Disney or Pixar that's ever spoken about periods. And I'll be honest, I don't think it ever has, not once. And it was a moment of pride because it just shows that the conversation's changing. That uh, the um, the content of what is now shown to kids, is more sort of now more realistic, more like you will go through these struggles in life, but it's okay. You know what I mean? It's not just the fairy tale sort of stories where everything is perfect and everything is wonderful. It's also the idea that you are growing up. You will go through changes. Women will go through certain changes, and men will go through certain changes. But it's okay. And so I was very proud of Pixar for taking that leap and being like, yeah, you know what, screw it. Women get periods, and as you're growing up and you're going through the motions, they will happen, and your emotions will change, and that sort of brings into the whole idea of turning red, turning into a panda. May having to learn to control her emotions, control how she feels, the embarrassment of having a helicopter parent, of the parent always being in your business and embarrassing you. And because I know myself growing up, there were many times when my parents embarrassed me, and I was embarrassed by them. And you eventually you learn to grow up out of that, and you eventually just you don't care. But obviously when you're younger, image is everything. And obviously when you're at school, you have a different version of you that goes to school. There's a different version at home, and you want to be cool and liked and all this jazz. And it's like it's a very John Hughes movie, very sort of young sort of teenage film. um but I really did enjoy it. It's just I struggled with not knowing what to say. There was only certain parts that really sort of pulled me away, like the visuals, for example. The visuals are excellent. One of the things with Pixar is that they're just every single movie they're blowing it out of the park in terms of animation. One of the biggest highlights is, I don't know if anybody else has seen Toy Story 4, but there's a moment in Toy Story 4 where, well, there's actually two moments where the movie just made me just open jaw, like, wow. Like, it was like when I first watched Avatar for the first time, of like, this can't, this is not animated, this has to be real, this looks too realistic. For example, in like Toy Story 4, there's a moment right at the beginning where there's rain and there's puddles and there's water, and the water looks real. The water looks realistic. Generally enough where you could slurp that water up and eat it, and like, I mean, drink it. Not that you'd want to because it's dirty water, but it looked realistic. And then there was another moment in Toy Story 4 for me that sold the whole film, which was one of the reasons why I told a lot of people to go and watch the movie. Not just the fact that it's a good movie and it made me cry, but generally it was this one moment of um, it's not really spoilers, but they were in a charity shop, and you can imagine like a charity shop being very old and musty and dusty and very sort of raggedy. And there's this cat that comes along, and it walks into this beam of sunlight. And as it gets in this beam of sunlight, as cats do, they arch and they stretch. And as it arched and stretched, the light bounced off the cat so perfectly. And the animation was done so beautifully, and the hairs, and you could see the dust every time as the cat sort of bent and moved, you could see the dust coming off the cat, because obviously the cat's been rolling around in the must and dust, and the cat just looked realistic for the 2-3 second frames that you just see this cat stretch. You're like, that cat's real, that's real. And that's the same sort of feeling I've had with this movie. There's a scene where you just see these, I think they're koi fish, swimming around in this little pond, and the fish look realistic. And there's this moment where the dad's cooking dinner, and you can see the meats and you can see the juices, and it looks realistic. And you compare it to how, but don't get me wrong, when I first saw Ratatouille, I thought, oh god, that looks delicious, that looks really good. And obviously at the time it kind of looks somewhat realistic. And now you jump in years and years ahead. I think like Ratatouille was 2003, I mean 2007, 2008. And then you get to Turning Red now in 2021, and that you look at the leap of distance that they've come to in the animation world, and you're like, damn, that looks so real, damn, that looks beautiful. And there are many moments, like I said, in Turning Red, where I just kind of was like, wow. Like, even like when there were moments where the movie was losing me, at least then I could look at the visuals and go, okay, Pixar are a top game. Pixar is still one of the best. Because that's one of the things that's annoyed me with Disney, was the fact of Disney's animation is good, but it's like Disney got to Tangled and was like, we don't need to innovate anymore. This is what all of our films are going to look like, because I bet you go from Tangled and go before Tangled. It was very different. Each movie had a different art style, looked kind of different. Animation style was a little bit different. And then you got to Tangled, and you just look at Tangled, and you look at all the films they've done afterwards. They've done since. Frozen, Moana. I'm sure there's others. I just can't remember them, but they all look relatively the same. Like you look at the new Frozen, and it doesn't look like it's been innovated or different at all. The ocean looked interesting, and when they were doing the ice magic, but I wasn't blown away by it. It was just like, oh, the music's good and the story's good, but the visuals, I've seen it before. Whereas Pixar, with every single movie, they're outdoing themselves. They're outdoing their animation every time. And this is why I just prefer Pixar over Disney, which I will get onto that in a minute. But overall, for Turning Red, would I recommend it? Yeah, definitely. For the story alone, even though it wasn't, the movie wasn't something that really sort of took me in. Like, I didn't get upset, I didn't cry, or I didn't get emotional, or really fully attached to the character. I would still say, as a Pixar movie, it's fantastic. As a story, it really breaks boundaries, talking about periods, talking about emotional struggle, talking about realistic stuff that you are going to go through as you're growing up. This is a movie that I think kids should go see, to realize that when you get to a certain age, you are going to start feeling different way. You're going to hit puberty. Life is going to hit you, but it's okay. That's normal. Don't need to be scared. You've got your friends who are there to help you. You've got family who are there to help you. You are not alone. And that message alone, I think, is very beautiful and very loving. So for that alone, I think for little kids, it's definitely good for little kids. For adults as well, people who like me who are big Pixar fans, you'll get enjoyment out of it. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it. For me personally, I think it's a good film. It's not, for me, it's not great or excellent. I still prefer Luca, and I still kind of like, I like Soul as well. But if I had to rate the three lockdown films in total, it would be Luca, Soul, Turning Red. But that's just my opinion. That's what I think. What do you think? You might think differently. You might have like blown you away. You might have thought the same, or you might have watched it and think, it's not that good. So let me know on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter at Nerdstalgic_pod, sort of let me know there and let me know what you think. If you think the same, you think differently, let me know. So on to the next and final segment, with the angle, as I'm calling it, and we'll see as to why I decided to do this side quest in the end, shall we? So you're probably sitting there thinking, all right, Luke, what's your angle? I've sat through your review. I've sat through your introduction. Give it to me. What's your angle? Tell me now. And I'll give it to you. I'll tell you what it is. But it's more of a question, more of a theory, more of an idea, more of a concept, shall we say. I'm throwing out different words that are basically mean the same thing. I just want you to think, keep an open mind for a second, right? Now, as I mentioned, Turning Red is the third movie to come out during pandemic from Pixar, right? The first film was Soul, then we had Luca, and then we had now Turning Red. Now, when Soul came out in 2020. It was the height of pandemic. It was around Christmas time, I believe, when it came out. I think Christmas Day it was released. Great film, loved it. Great reviews were great. People seemed to really enjoy it. But we understand that the movie couldn't come out in cinemas because of the pandemic. Okay, that makes sense. Put my hands up. I get it. Fine. So we then get to 2021. Luca comes out. Again, Luca comes out. Beautiful, amazing. It blew me away. Me and my mum sat there and we were sobbing by the end. Beautiful film. Loved it. Okay. Again, that movie didn't come out in cinemas. It stayed on Disney Plus streaming. Which again, okay, that one you can understand, but you can kind of argue it because at that stage, around 2021, majority of the cinemas in the UK had been opened. Not all, but majority of them had opened. I know my local cinema was open around when Luca came out. majority of the cinemas in America, again, not all, but majority of states had opened their cinemas, and I'm sure it was same for some parts of Europe as well. I can't talk for most of Europe because I don't know, but I can say for some clarity, some sureness, that I know most of the UK was open and some parts of America. Um, but fine, if you don't want to argue it, fine, okay, Luca, let's put it onto streaming. So now we got to now 2022. Turning Red comes out. Pandemic is still around, COVID is still around, but things are starting to ease now. Things are starting to open up a lot more now, which you can almost guarantee to say that merely if every if not all um, cinemas are open here in the UK, and I'm sure the same can be said for America, and probably can be said the same for most of Europe now. Um, so what's the excuse? What's my point? My point is Turning Red hasn't come out in cinemas. Now you're probably thinking, Luke, well, what does this matter? Why do you care? Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. I'm glad you thought it. The reason I care because, as I said, I'm a big lover of animation. I love animation. I do. I think animation, for me personally, like I'm a big movie buff. And if you've been listening to my episodes, you can tell that I really have a passion for movies, for cinema, for how films are done. And one thing I love about animation is that, like, I grew up when I first started watching animated movies were still being drawn. You did have Toy Story, which was like the first animated movie in 1995. I was born in '98, so granted they were animated movies that had already out by the time I was born, but majority of animated studios were still being doing hand drawn. I personally quite like hand drawn movies. I understand why they no longer do them because they take longer than digital to make because you have to draw every single scene. So I get it. I completely understand that. But I love animation because there are the same way with video games. You can tell a story in a different in a different way. The narrative can stay the same, but the visualness is different. And the idea of that, you know, with animation you can do anything, you can go anywhere, whereas if you was to try to do it in live action, it would cost more. You'd have to spend more on production, you'd have to spend more on hiring all the actors and paying the actors to be there for months and months and months shooting, and then you have to build the sets, you've got to build the props, you've got to do the special effects, you've got to pay for the prosthetics. A lot goes into it, whereas if you do it digitally, you probably have your actors in for about you know half a day to 2 days at max just to do every single line, all the bits of dialogue, and you pay them, and it's easy work for them. And the animations are, I'm not saying animation's easy, but it's just easier to do animation than having to do the full production. And I just feel when in terms of animation, some of the best stories I've seen, especially from Pixar, have been animated. Wally breaks my heart every time I watch Wally. I love Wally. Bug's Life blows me away. Ratatouille, another one blows me away. The Good Dinosaur. I know it wasn't very well loved and well received by many people, but I quite like The Good Dinosaur. And again, it hit me emotionally. It makes me cry at the end every time. And I'll admit that. I don't mind admitting that movies make me cry, because for me, if a movie can make me cry, can make me feel emotion and make me feel attachment to a character that I know inherently is not real, that's a good story. If I'm sitting there sobbing because of toy for animated toys that I know in real life, sadly, toys don't come alive when I'm not there. As far as I know, I'm looking around my room at all my figures to kind of give them the look that I know that they know that I know that they're alive. That they know that I know that they're alive when I'm not around. Yeah, but if a movie can make me feel sort of emotional attachment to inanimate objects, then that's a story well done. That's a great story being told. Now, the reason I'm going on this spin and the reason I'm going on this angle is the fact of you have to think of it from the animated perspective. You've got to think from the writer's perspective, from the actors, everybody who had hand in production. You got to think it was like, okay, Soul makes sense. We wanted it to bring out, but pandemic was bad, so we couldn't release it to the cinemas. So we can't make our money back on it, but we want to release the story anyway. Okay, fine, we get it. Next year, we got Luca. Again, majority of places are starting to open up again. COVID's still a rise, but places are starting to open again. But Disney goes, no, we're just going to put it onto streaming. Okay, okay, fine. We could have made some money back, but Okay, fine. It can be argued, but we won't argue it. Now we got to 2022, and we've gotten to the point now where things are starting to open up again. Things are back into the normal swing, and now Pixar goes, "We've got this new project, Turning Red. You know, can we release it into cinemas, into theaters to get some money?" Now, again, I wasn't there at this conversation, so I don't know if this actually happened. But this is just my interpretation of what I think might have happened. So again, take it as it is. But it just feels like they came in, asked that, and then sort of Disney were like, "No, it's going on streaming." And you've got to think, if you're Pixar, how annoying that's got to be. You've put all this time and all this work. Things are starting to open up. You want to get some money back. You want to be able to, you want the movie to do well. You want it to be seen. And again, the whole idea, it is a business at the end of the day. Like they want to tell us stories, but they want to get some profit back. But Disney's come and gone, well, no, it's going to streaming. You know what I mean? Which is, and if I think again, well, Luke, why do you care? Another thing I care. Disney have decided that no Pixar movies are going to cinemas, right? But most of Disney's movies have gone out. Frozen was released, and I'm sure other Disney. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know there's been other Disney movies, both live action and what's call it, both live action and animated, have all been sort of released in cinemas. Spider-Man, Marvel movies, they've been released. The only one that hasn't, if I remember correctly, was Black Widow. But even then, the Marvel movies have been released. There's been other stuff that's been released, live action and non-live action sort of programs. Jungle Cruise, that was released in streaming as well as in cinemas. And I sit here and think of as to why. You know, I understand that Disney owns Pixar, but at the same stage, Pixar is still its own studio, and they make their own profits. Fair enough, Disney gets some of the profits, but they still make their own money. Um, and it kind of the idea of is Disney doing it because they only want their own shows in there? Why has Disney decided that like only their stuff can go into cinemas and Pixar's can't? And it's just one of those things I want people to think about. It's not an important topic. It's just a very one that's kind of been playing in my mind for months and months now, and it's been going around a lot of, like I mentioned, on other movie blogs and other people talking about films. How it just seems a bit peculiar. Is it a competition thing? Is it the fact of Disney doesn't want the competition? Because they know whenever they go up against Pixar, Pixar always wins, and Pixar does. They always seem to win. Um, Even with like how big Moana and Frozen is, Pixar has to bring out one of their shows, and people just go to see it. They don't even matter what it is. It will still make a lot of money. Toy Story, I'm sure Toy Story 4 made $1 billion. I'm sure. I think it did anyway. It was close to that. But the Disney Toy Story brand's way over $1 billion anyway, because I'm sure Toy Story 3 made it. But Disney's always gets blown out of the water by Pixar. And fair enough, because as I mentioned, Disney never seems to innovate. They never seem to do any different. They got to Tangled and was like, well, let's not innovate anymore. Let's just get this. It's like Bethesda. I'm going off a bit tangent here. The idea of Bethesda game studios, they use the same game engine. They've been using the same game engine for years, the creation engine. All they've been doing is they've just updated that engine over and over. And the problem is with that is, yeah, you can update it, that's fine. But every single bug, every single sort of glitch or anything that is an issue in other games will persist in the next game and the next game, because the engine is still the same. You're not really um, not invigorating. There's a word for basically, getting better, improving. I've lost it. I'm sure it's probably coming to your minds. If it is that word, innovated, innovation. There's no innovation, and it's the same with Disney. They got to. It seems to me, for looking at their art style and their animation style, that they got to Tangled and was like, okay, this is fine. This works. We're sticking with this. And you can refine it and you can make it look more beautiful and more sort of stylized to what you want it to be, but it just makes every single movie you do look the same. You know what I mean? It just looks different. Like the only thing I would say that looked really really good from Tangled onwards, from any Disney show, the Disney movie that they've done, is in Moana, and is the ocean, how the ocean looks. But is that because the majority of the movie is shown on the ocean? That the ocean is a character in itself, so they have to put more work into it because Moana is mostly on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Whereas you think if Moana was just on an island, it would only look good enough for small scenes. But scenes where it was like long shot scenes where like on top of a mountain you can see the ocean far off, it doesn't need to be as detailed because you're not looking at it up close. Um, is it the reason why it looks so nice is because they put the time into it because they knew that we were going to be at sea always and you're always going to see the sea, so we need to make the sea look nice. If you get what I'm saying, right? Um, because when you look at Frozen, for example, Frozen 2, the sea looks completely different because you only see it for that one scene where she's running through the waves and it's dark. And because it's dark and because there's not much light, they don't have to put much work into the animation. It's all about angles and light. Um, I'm taking it from my sort of look working in not animation specifically, but my sort of working in game design and the whole idea of angles and camera angles and when you want to do cinematics and how you want certain things to look good, and now that if you use light in a good way, in the right way, you don't have to worry about how good something looks because the lighting will hide majority of the jank and will just show what you want to be seen. I don't know. Maybe I'm just blowing this out of proportion, but the overall point that I'm coming back to, it just seems a bit strange that Turning Red again is a good film. And I do believe, I don't believe it would make 1 billion, but I do believe if it was released in cinemas, it would make a good amount back. If I had to make an estimated guess, I would say 150 to 200 million dollars, at the box office. Because again, it's a Pixar film, so that's going to bring in people. It's also an animated movie. We're coming close to Easter. Kids are going to have time off school. Parents are going to have to be like, okay, whenever you get the holidays, it's going to be like, so I need something to do with my kids. I have kids or I have a child. I need something to do with them. I don't really want to take them to the park. I don't know. I'll go cinema. Majority of people go cinema. You usually find that in most cinemas, they get their most money during Easter and summer holidays and stuff like that because the kids are off. Kids will want to go to cinemas. Kids will want to go see films, and because of how close we are to Easter, for by all means, Disney and Pixar have got the money where they could just be like, oh well, let's just push it and keep it in cinemas a bit longer, get a little bit more money out of it. Especially now, like the weather's lovely. The weather's nice. I would be like, you know what? Yeah, I want to go down to the cinema and I want to go watch a film and then come out and maybe go to a restaurant and just enjoy my day. But even if it was raining, it'd be like, well, it's great. But the point is I'm trying to make is the fact of because it's a Pixar movie, because it's an animated movie, and because how close we are to Easter, parents are going to want to take their kids to see this. And it's not just going to be them paying for themselves. They're going to be paying for their kids. They're going to be paying for, popcorn and stuff like that. So the theaters themselves are getting revenue as well. So overall, I think that the film would have done really, really well in cinema. It's just strange how it hasn't been released. And I think what we'll see the next time Pixar, I think the next Pixar film, I think is Lightyear, um, with the origins of Buzz Lightyear. I think that's the next one this year. We will see. If that one doesn't go into cinemas, then I feel like me and everybody else who has this theory and idea, there's some credence to it. There's some weight to it. If that doesn't go into cinemas, then um, I think it makes sense. If it just goes into streaming, I think then we got to start asking the questions as to why. But that's just my theory. That's just my idea. There's no real point to it. It's just a thought I had in my mind, and I wanted to share with you folks of the idea of it's just a bit strange how this is the third movie that's been released on streaming from Pixar that could have done quite well. Twice Soul could have done quite well. Luca could have done quite well. Um, Probably it would have done better pre-COVID, but because of COVID, it probably won't do as well, but it would still do well enough. There are a lot of movies, live action movies being released in the cinema now, and they're doing quite well for COVID times. Spider-Man did a lot better than people thought it would do. That's because it's Spider-Man, but even so, it did surprisingly well. And that's the point I'm trying to make is just the fact of it just seems strange by Disney. They could have recouped their money and they could have made their money back, and Pixar would have got their money and Disney would have got their money. But I don't know. Seems a bit odd. Seems a bit strange. But yeah, so that's just my little theory. That's my little sort of rant, my little review on Turning Red, and my little sort of quizzical, sort of weird understanding as to why Disney's doing what they're doing. But we will see. When Lightyear comes out, we'll know how the full story. But that's everything. That's my thought on that. I've gone for about 16 minutes on this thought, so it's a very long thought, isn't it? But I hope you enjoyed Turning Red. If you've seen it, let me know. Obviously on Twitter. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and yeah, I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your weekend. So, as always, stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace, and thank you for listening to today's episode. Bye bye.